Okay, now we're gonna go over a self-check for hip motion and hip strength. And there's gonna be 6 basic motions that we're going to go over. So first off, we are going to go over hip flexion. Okay, so that's bending it up, it's coming up. Then we'll do hip extension, which is bringing it back that way. We will do hip abduction, which is bringing it out. We will do hip adduction, which is bringing it in. We will also do hip external rotation and internal rotation. Now, did you see what I just did when we did internal rotation? My body went, ha! So I'm also going to show you some common cheating tips to make sure that you're really checking the motion. This is an overview. Remember to avoid the 5 Ps. This doesn't replace evaluation by a healthcare provider. And this is a screening tool to help you identify if you have restrictions or weakness, but by no means is it all encompassing. And if you think you have issues, I'd make sure that you get checked out by a physical therapist. Okay, so first off, we are looking at hip range of motion. So we are bringing that hip flexion. So we're bringing the hip up. How far can you bring it up? Okay, you can do this in sitting or you can do it lying down. So how far does that hip come up? And you may be limited by your anatomy too. So does it come here? Does it come here? You do one side and then you do the other side. This also kind of checks the knee, although we're not working on the knee. So if you have a very stiff knee, you can still check your range of motion just by pulling behind the thigh there. So does it come all the way up? Is it painful? Is it restricted? Are you having any referred symptoms? And does it feel like, do you feel any clicking or popping while it's happening? So that's flexion. Now extension, you're coming onto your stomach, and the knee is straight and we're raising that whole leg up. So a lot of times people will rotate their body or they'll bring their back up. You want to isolate that and just keep that knee straight, or you can bend the knee and come up like that. And as you can see, it's not a big motion and my pelvic bone is staying on the ground. If my hip raises up like that, then I'm compensating, okay? So that is hip extension. Now, again, we're just doing range of motion right now. So now we have hip abduction. So how far does it come out to the side? And then hip adduction, which is bringing it back in, hip adduction. And then generally the easiest way to screen for hip rotation is in sitting. So we're going to rotate the hip. So this is external rotation and this is internal rotation. And if you're doing this like I was initially, then that's one sign of cheating. You're gonna have generally more rotation in external rotation than you are in internal rotation. And I didn't say this, but for each motion that we're checking, check both sides. So you're comparing right to left. Is one side more mobile than the other? Is one side painful than the other? Does one side click? You know, so many things that you can look at. Okay, and so this is external rotation and then internal rotation. Okay, so we did the range of motion and you're keeping an eye on any restrictions, any pain, any symptoms. Now we are looking at strength. We have what we as physical therapists, it's a manual muscle test, okay? It's a scale of 0 to 5. 0 means no muscle is firing. That muscle is nothing is happening. 5 is normal, okay? So I'm not gonna break down every score in this manual muscle testing grade. If you wanna look it up, you certainly can, or you can ask me questions in the comments below. But that gives you an overall view. In terms of self-checking, you're not going to be able to give yourself more than a 3 because Basically, the manual muscle test means that someone else is testing your strength. And so you're not actually able, especially with some of these, to test your strength. So if it was, we were using the bicep as an example, so we bend that bicep up. So that's at least a 3 out of 5 because you have full range of motion. And then we do a resistance test, okay? Whew. So then I would give myself a 5/5 because I can test my bicep like that. But some of these hip motions, you're just not going to be able to do that. But that gives you an overview. So if you have full range of motion with those tests that the screening for the range of motion that we just did, then you're at least a 3/5. And let's go through some of the strength testing positions for the hip. So we'll start off with hip flexion. So as a person that's doing this, you're going to raise that hip up, okay? Are you able to raise it up, and is it equal on both sides? So that's at least a 3 if you're able to do that. Then you take your hand and you're pushing down into it. Pushing down into it. Is one side weaker than the other? Does one side give up faster than the other? Does one side feel stronger? And remember, most of us are asymmetrical somehow, so it's likely that you have some asymmetries in your hip. So just give, again, you're not going to be able to give yourself a score over 3, but that gives you an idea of how to test your hip flexors. So the hip flexors are the ones here in the front. Now, testing hip extension is done lying on your stomach. Before we go over testing hip extension, I want to show you one other way that you can test that range of motion in the hip. Okay, so basically this is, let's do this. Maybe you can see it a little bit better there. So this is hip extension. So you're looking at this hip joint, and does my leg go back? Sometimes when people do this, they're arching their backs like that. Well, that's wrong. You want to see if your body stays nice and tall, and it's the hip that's extending. Okay, so let's go to our stomachs, and we are testing hip extension strength. So you lie flat on your stomach, gonna bend that knee, and you're raising the leg up. So if you can do that, then you're at least a 3/5, okay? And then this is one that you're not going to be able to test yourself. So if you had a physical therapist to check you, they would press down and see how strong you were and then compare it to your opposite side. All right? So that's hip extension strength. Now we have hip abduction strength. So you need to be on your side. Bottom leg is bent, top leg is straight. I cannot tell you how important it is not to rotate your pelvis back. So your leg comes straight up like that. So many people do this where they rotate their pelvis and they're bringing it up like that. That's wrong. It's up like this. And so if you can do that, then you're at least a 3/5 on that scale. And then if you were having somebody test your muscle strength, they would be above you pressing down to test that hip abduction strength. And then you do it on both sides. Now we're going to test hip adduction, which is your inner thigh. This is your inner thigh strength. Okay, so then you're coming up like this. And then if you had somebody there with you, then they would press down to see how strong you are and compare it to each side and look at the scale. So here, if you can do this, then you're at least a 3/5. So now you've done 4 motions of the hip. Now we're going to do external rotation and internal rotation. So external rotation is this. So if you had somebody there, they'd be pushing down. You can try to push yourself down, but it's awkward. So I don't think it's all that effective. But you know, you can get an idea if you can give yourself a little resistance there. So that's external rotation and then internal rotation. Again, you can try pushing down a little bit, but it's not all that effective. So you're coming out this way. The big thing also is really looking at that asymmetry. So right, left. to me right now, I look pretty symmetrical with that, but with some exercises that I'm doing, I notice that I have some asymmetries, especially with my external rotation and my internal rotation. Okay, so that was, a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I hope that that gives you a concept of how to screen your hips for range of motion and strength. And then if you were to have someone check you further, then that also gives you an idea of what they're going to be looking for. Drop any questions below. I'd love to hear from you.